It was a quiet Tuesday when she appeared on my porch, a grown woman now, soaking wet, though the sky was clear. She held something in her hands, a folded, faded blanket with my initials still stitched in the corner. "I think this was yours," she said. Her voice shook, not from cold, but from something else. I stared at the blanket, then at her. She looked familiar, too familiar, but aged, changed. "I've been looking for you," she whispered. "There's something I need to tell you. It's about that night." My knees weakened. That night, the storm, the girl in the alley, the blanket I never expected to see again. She stepped inside, gently. But to understand how we got to this moment, we need to go back to the beginning. The storm hadn't come yet. 20 years ago, I lived on the edge of the old town, in a peeling yellow house with a crooked fence and a porch light that flickered even when it wasn't raining. My name was Evelyn. People didn't say it much. At the time, I was 38 and already felt older than most. I worked the early shift at the town's post office, sorting mail before the world woke up. My hands always smelled of paper and ink. The job was quiet, dependable, like me. I'd lost my husband 6 years earlier in a factory accident. No children, no siblings, just a photo of the two of us on a beach in South Carolina, back when we thought time moved slower. It sat by my kitchen window next to an orchid I kept forgetting to water. Mornings were mechanical. Wake up, brew coffee, butter toast, walk 2 blocks to the post office, smile politely, walk home, water the plants, microwave dinner, read in bed with the radio humming something from the 70s. No one really noticed me, and I preferred it that way, or convinced myself I did. There were moments, though, quiet ones, when loneliness throbbed louder than any storm could. I'd stand at the back window and imagine the house full of voices, laughter echoing from the hallway, a teenager stomping up the stairs, a dog barking at squirrels in the yard. But those were just ghosts I entertained in my quieter moments. One afternoon, I passed a thrift store on my way back from the market. A stack of old quilts caught my eye, one in particular. It was frayed, patched with worn cotton squares, but it was warm, familiar, like something my grandmother might have stitched together from memory. I bought it for $5. Sewed my initials in the corner, just a habit I picked up when my husband was alive. He liked to say it made things feel owned, even if they weren't. That night, I folded the quilt neatly over the arm of my living room chair. I remember looking at it and thinking, some things deserve to be passed on. The next day, the clouds began to gather. The wind tasted like metal. The news warned of flash floods. I filled the bathtub with water, just in case, checked the flashlight, charged the phone. Not that anyone ever called. By evening, the street was a blur of headlights and sirens, people rushing home, dogs barking nervously. I stood on the porch, holding a cup of tea, watching the rain threaten from the horizon. But I didn't know then, couldn't have known, that one choice made that night would echo for decades, that in a moment of instinct, I'd reach into my quiet life and offer warmth to a stranger. And that one day, she'd come back, carrying more than just the blanket I gave her. The rain came slowly at first, a soft tapping on the roof, like a nervous hand at the door. Then came the wind, not howling, not theatrical, just insistent, like something was pushing at the town from all sides. I remember standing by the window, the same one I'd looked out of for years, and thinking, this one's different. The streetlight across the road flickered, then gave out. Darkness spilled into the block, like ink. Car alarms went off, and somewhere in the distance, a transformer exploded. The silence after was thick, like the whole town was holding its breath. I lit a candle, just one, and placed it by the kitchen sink. The local station said the storm had stalled, dumping more rain in a few hours than we usually saw all spring. Flash floods, stay indoors, avoid the low roads. I thought of the underpass 2 blocks away, always flooded. Kids used to skateboard through the puddles in summer. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and stood by the door, listening. That's when I heard it. A voice, faint, like a gasp, like someone had shouted once but couldn't find the breath to do it again. I opened the door. The rain hit me like a slap. I stepped onto the porch. The world was gray and violent. Water ran down the gutters like rivers. A trash can rolled down the street. And there, barely lit by the glow of my candle from inside, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 10. She stood across the street, soaked to the bone, hair matted, arms hugging her own body. She didn't cry. She just stared. There was something unreal about it, like she'd stepped out of a photograph. "Hey!" I called out. "You all right?" She didn't answer. She didn't move. The street between us was already knee-deep. I wasn't young anymore, but I didn't think. I grabbed the quilt from the chair inside, that old patchwork thing with my stitched initials, and stepped out into the storm. The water was cold and fast. I held onto the fence, then a mailbox, then a signpost. Every step felt like a question. Is this safe? Is this smart? But all I saw was her, still standing, unmoved, like the storm didn't matter. When I reached her, she looked up at me. Her eyes were green, bright, scared, but not surprised. "I don't know where my mom went," she said quietly, almost apologetically. Without a word, I draped the blanket over her shoulders. It sagged with the rain but still gave her shape. She let out a breath, not relief exactly, just a return to breathing. "Come on," I said. "Let's get you inside." We crossed together, slow, my arm around her. She was cold but steady. I brought her in, sat her by the heater, gave her soup. She didn't say much, just held the blanket close, her fingers tracing the stitching in the corner. When I asked her name, she said nothing. I didn't press. I figured she'd talk when she was ready. But by morning, she was gone. The blanket, too. The front door was closed. No footprints. Just a damp spot on the floor and a bowl in the sink. I searched the street, asked around. No one had seen a girl. No reports. No parents looking. Just another mystery swallowed by the storm. I tried to forget her. I told myself maybe she had family. Maybe they came. Maybe she was okay. But part of me always wondered, not just where she'd gone, but why she looked at me like she knew me. I never saw that blanket again. Not until 20 years later. The town spent days drying out, basements flooded, streets cracked, the underpass collapsed entirely, the same one I'd worried about. News vans came and went. One reporter called it a 100-year storm, but no one mentioned the girl. There were no missing child reports, no grateful parents knocking on doors, no police inquiries, just silence. I checked the hospital anyway. Nothing. I walked past shelters, kept an eye out at the diner. For weeks, I scanned faces, but her green eyes never showed up again. I told myself I imagined it, that stress and rain had conjured some child from my memories. Maybe she was real, maybe not. But the damp circle on my carpet stayed for days, and the chair she'd sat in smelled faintly of lavender and mud. What I didn't tell anyone was this. That night, after she'd gone, I found a scratch on my ankle, thin, shallow, but bleeding. I hadn't noticed it before. It must have happened on the street, climbing over something, but I couldn't remember when or how. It festered for days. I wrapped it tight and wore boots to work. It left a thin scar, nothing big, but visible when I looked for it. A reminder, maybe, that it had happened, that she had. Weeks turned into months. The town rebuilt itself. The storm became a story people told newcomers. You should have seen the water on Maple, up to your chest. I went back to my routine. The orchid died. I replaced it with a cactus, less demanding, but the quilt, the one with my initials, was gone. And for some reason, that loss lingered. I didn't tell anyone why it mattered, not because of the price or the fabric, but because for one night it had meant something. It had been more than warm. It had been enough to someone, or at least I hoped. Years passed. I never remarried, never moved. My hair grayed, my joints ached. But the window stayed the same, the porch too. And every time it rained, I stood there, holding a cup of tea, wondering where she'd gone, if she remembered, if she'd made it. I didn't need to be thanked, but I did need to believe she was real. That night, that choice, had become the only thing in my life that didn't fade with time. And that unsettled me. Because when a single moment defines your sense of worth, it's hard to know who you are without it. I tried to let go, but I'd walk past rows of blankets in stores and run my fingers over the fabric, hoping absurdly to feel something familiar. A patch, a thread, a shape, nothing. And eventually, I stopped looking. Until one morning, 20 years later, I opened the front door to check the mail, and there it was, folded neatly. A quilt, my quilt, laid on the step like an offering, like a ghost come home. I picked it up. My hands trembled. The initials were still there, slightly faded, but mine. I pressed it to my face and closed my eyes. Somewhere, deep in the threads, I thought I smelled lavender again. And then the knock came. 3 soft taps. I opened the door, and there she stood. Her name was Mariah. She said it softly, like she hadn't used it out loud in a long time. I let her in without a word, not because I trusted her, not yet, but because I felt something in my chest uncoil, something that had been waiting, quietly, for 2 decades. She sat at the same chair she had that night. Her hair was darker now, tied in a low braid. Her face had sharpness time hadn't dulled, high cheekbones, a scar near her eyebrow I didn't remember. The quilt lay folded in her lap. She didn't touch her tea. "I've been trying to find you for a long time," she said. Her voice was lower than I remembered, a woman's voice now, but still laced with that quietness I'd never forgotten. "I didn't think you remembered me," I said. She looked up. Her eyes were still green. "I never forgot." And then, like someone had unlocked a drawer inside her, she began to tell me everything. That night, after I'd gone to sleep, she'd left, not because she wanted to, but because someone had come for her. A woman, thin, ragged, eyes hollow from addiction. "My mother," she said. "She found me curled up in the blanket, inside your house. She dragged me out before you woke up. I begged to stay. I told her you were kind, that you made soup." I said nothing. She made me give her the quilt, said it looked valuable. I clung to it so hard that it tore a little. She turned the edge toward me. There it was, a faint rip near the blue patch. I'd stitched that square myself when the old one frayed. We moved again, then again. Shelters, cars, motels. The quilt was the only thing I kept. She hated it, said it reminded her I trusted strangers more than her. "Did you?" I asked. She smiled, sad and certain. "Yes." She told me she left home at 16, hitchhiked across 3 states, lived in a church basement for a while, worked in kitchens, swept floors, saved tips. Eventually she got her GED, then community college, then a full scholarship. "I work in social outreach now," she said, "mostly with displaced teens. Kids who run, kids like I was." I didn't know what to say. My throat was tight. "I kept the blanket," she said, "everywhere I went. Sometimes it was the only thing I had." She took a deep breath. "But that's not why I came back." I looked at her. "Then why?" I asked. She hesitated, and then she reached into her bag. She pulled out a journal, old, leather-bound, cracked at the spine. She opened to the middle. There, on a torn page, was a drawing. A house, my house, drawn in the shaky lines of a child's hand. And beneath it, in uneven letters, "The lady with warm hands lives here." "I drew this the day after the storm," she said, "in one of the shelters. They thought I made it up, a dream, a coping mechanism, a fantasy about being rescued." She closed the journal. "But I knew it was real. I knew you were real." Her voice cracked. "I just didn't know your name." She looked up at me. "So I spent years looking, using what little I remembered. A yellow house, a crooked porch, a candle in the window, a voice that said, 'Come on, let's get you inside.'" I wiped my eyes. "You found me." "I had to," she said. She held out the quilt. "I need to give this back to you." But I didn't take it. Not yet. I just sat there, listening to the rain begin to fall again outside, softer this time, more like memory than warning. The rain outside grew steadier, a hush that filled the spaces between our words. Mariah placed the quilt on the coffee table, carefully smoothing the corners like it deserved reverence. Her hands paused over the stitched initials, tracing the faded thread. "Why did you come now?" I asked. It wasn't suspicion in my voice, just something between wonder and fear. I'd waited so long without knowing I was waiting, and now that she was here, I didn't know where to place the feeling. "I think I needed to be someone first," she said. "Someone who could come back without shame." I nodded slowly. "You never owed me anything." "But I owed myself," she said. "I owed that girl, the one you pulled out of the dark and gave soup and silence and safety, even if just for one night." I looked at her closely now. She had calluses on her fingers, worry in her brow, a gentleness she hadn't learned from ease. "You look tired," I said. She smiled. "That's how I know I'm doing something worthwhile." We sat there in the hush, surrounded by old furniture, an aging orchid I'd managed to revive, and a clock that ticked too loudly. Then she said, "I brought something else." She reached into her bag again, slower this time, and pulled out a thin manila envelope. Inside, papers, photos, a faded ID, a file. I tracked down records, she said, from shelters, schools, hospitals. I pieced together where I'd been, the names used, the dates. It took years. I leaned closer. And? I asked. She took a deep breath. One of the shelters kept a logbook for emergencies, and in it someone wrote, "Small girl, no guardian. Said she came from house with candlelight and warm woman. No name known." She looked up at me. "That was you." "I remember the candle," she added. "It was the only light on the street." She handed me the file. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked. "Because no one else knows this story," she said. "No one else would believe it mattered. But I needed someone to say it did. I needed you to see what that night became." I opened the folder. Inside was a small photo, a grainy black and white from a school ID, a younger Mariah, same eyes, tired smile. In the corner, a small sticker had been added, "Graduate, Social Services Intern of the Year." My fingers trembled. "I didn't do this," I said, barely above a whisper. She looked at me with something like grace. "No, but you started it." Then her voice dropped, low, hesitant. "There's one more thing." She pulled out a sealed letter. The paper was old, fragile, the ink slightly smeared. "I wrote this when I was 13, she said. "To you. I just didn't know where to send it." I took it with both hands. "Do you want me to read it now?" She shook her head. "When I leave." "When will that be?" "Soon." There was silence between us, not awkward, just heavy. "You sure you don't want the quilt back?" I asked. She hesitated. Then, gently, "I think it was always yours. I just borrowed it." We sat like that for a while. Two women, 20 years apart, bridged by a storm, a moment, and a threadbare blanket. Outside, the rain softened to a mist. Mariah stood up. She placed one hand on the table, not to steady herself, but to leave something behind. "I never said thank you," she said. "You just did," I replied. "No, I mean," she stopped, then nodded once, eyes full, but not spilling. She turned and walked to the door. "Mariah," I called before she stepped out. She looked back. "Was it really the blanket that brought you here?" She smiled. "No," she said. "It was the way you never asked me anything that night, like I didn't need to explain my fear." And then she was gone. After the door closed, I stood there for a long time. The house was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet it had been for 20 years. This silence had weight. It wasn't loneliness anymore. It was memory, settling into its place. I sat down and unfolded the quilt fully, laying it across my lap. The fabric was softer now, worn thin in places, but intact. My initials still clung to the corner. EW, a little crooked, just how I stitched back then. I ran my fingers along the rip near the blue patch. She'd held on to this all those years, through shelters, through school, through chaos, and I hadn't even known she existed, really. Not until that knock on my door. I stared at the letter she left. The envelope was delicate, yellowed around the edges, but I didn't open it right away. Instead, I made tea. The kettle hissed. The window blinked with light from passing cars. Somewhere down the street, a child laughed, short and distant. I thought about the girl I met that night, how small and still she had been, how easily I might have shut the door, pretended not to hear her, left the quilt on the chair, but I hadn't, and it was strange how a simple thing like that had carried so much weight. Not heroism, not sacrifice, just instinct, human instinct, and yet it changed everything for someone, maybe even for me. I used to feel like my life didn't mean much. I'd tell myself I hadn't done anything remarkable. No great love stories, no brilliant career, just days stacked on days, sorting mail, feeding stray cats, sending birthday cards to neighbors who never responded. But now there was a thread, a line drawn through time. From that moment on the porch, through the cold street, to this table, this teacup, this letter. It didn't make me important, but it made me part of something, and that was more than I'd ever expected. I sat down at the table and finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single page. "Dear lady with the warm hands, I don't know your name, but I know you saved me. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't make me explain the fear. You didn't judge the silence, or the dirt, or the missing mother. You just gave me a blanket and soup. And for one night, I felt safe. I carried that feeling with me, through everything. I named it you. When I couldn't sleep, I'd wrap myself in the quilt and imagine what your house smelled like. I'd remember the sound of your voice saying, "Come on, let's get you inside." You were the proof that the world had corners of kindness, so I became one of them. If you're reading this, it means I found you. And if I found you, then maybe I can find others like you too. With love, always, the girl from the rain. I folded the letter gently and tucked it into the quilt's seam. Outside, the rain had stopped. For the first time in years, I opened the front door and stepped outside. The street smelled of wet leaves and earth. A breeze stirred the wind chimes. Across the way, a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in months waved at me. I waved back. Then, without planning to, I walked down the steps, turned the corner, and headed toward the community center. I wasn't sure what I'd do when I got there, but I had a blanket to pass on. 3 weeks later, I received a letter. No return address, just my name in soft pencil. Inside was a photo. It showed a small room, plain, clean, lit with soft yellow light. In the corner was a cot. A folded blanket lay neatly at the edge. Not mine, not the one I'd given her, but something new, colorful, handmade. Someone had stitched initials into the corner, JW. There was a note clipped to the back. Her name is Jasmine, 12 years old. Came in last night during the rain. She didn't speak at first, just shook. I gave her tea and sat beside her. Then I gave her a blanket. She looked at me like she'd never seen kindness before. She's sleeping now. Thank you for teaching me how to begin. M. I turned the photo over again, stared at the girl. She reminded me of Mariah, small, tight-shouldered, eyes holding more years than she should. That night, I placed the photo in the drawer beside Mariah's letter. Then I picked up the quilt and held it close, imagining the room, the girl, the moment. Somewhere across the state, or maybe the country, Mariah was becoming what she'd once received, a quiet rescuer, a provider of stillness. I could see it now, the way the world passed warmth along when no one was watching. And Mariah, she hadn't just remembered what happened, she'd built a life around it. A week later, a woman named Lorraine from the community center called me. Evelyn, right? The one with the quilt story? I chuckled. I suppose that's me. She said you might be interested in mentoring some of the older girls, the ones who don't trust many people. We have a lot of them lately. I paused. I'm not really a mentor. She didn't say you were, Lorraine said gently. She just said you were safe. That word, safe. The one word Mariah had never said directly, but had written all over that letter. I showed up the following Tuesday. They gave me a small reading room. I brought tea bags, a few books, and, of course, the quilt. They touched it, quietly, asked about the patches, about the initials, and little by little, they asked about me. I never told them the full story, just that someone once lent me kindness, and now I was trying to return the favor. One girl, shy, sharp, sat with me 3 weeks in a row without saying a word. Then, one afternoon, she reached over and said, "I like the blue square best. It looks like the sky before a storm." That was all, but it was everything. And that night, I walked home feeling full, like I wasn't just remembering the past anymore. I was passing it on. It was nearly spring when the package arrived. No note, just a box, soft and light. Inside, a new quilt, different design, brighter colors, tighter stitching, but unmistakably handmade. And in the corner, EW, my initials. I stared at it for a long time before realizing it wasn't my old blanket. It was a replica, a tribute. Someone had recreated it from memory. Every patch, every seam, only newer, stronger, meant to last. Folded inside was a card. You gave me warmth when I had none. You gave me silence when noise was too much. You gave me space when the world felt too close. Now, let this blanket do the same for someone else, because the first thread was always you. M. I pressed the fabric to my chest. I had no children, no legacy, no name in any headlines, but here I was, stitched into someone's story. I sat on the porch that evening, the quilt across my knees, watching the street as dusk fell. Children rode bikes, a dog barked down the road. The mailman waved, a new one, younger, cheerful. I waved back, and for the first time, I let myself think, maybe this is what a legacy looks like. Not plaques, not praise, just impact, quiet, lasting, carried forward in invisible ways. I thought of the young girl Mariah had helped, Jasmine, and imagined her sitting somewhere now, wrapped in warmth, feeling safe for the first time. and I thought of Mariah, moving through the world like a storm that healed instead of harmed. She'd taken a single night and built a life around it, not because she had to, but because someone, once, had treated her like she mattered, and now she knew how to do that for others. That evening I walked to the center again. There was a new girl, pale, guarded, holding a stuffed rabbit with one torn ear. She didn't speak. I didn't push. I just sat beside her and draped the new quilt across both our laps. She flinched at first. Then she let out a breath, just like Mariah had. And I knew in that moment the thread hadn't ended. It had only changed hands. There's a photograph in my hallway now. It's not framed fancy, just a simple wood border I found at the thrift shop. Inside, 3 folded quilts. One faded, one bright, one patched. People don't ask about it much. They assume it's just decor. But I know. Each of them tells a different part of a story no one else saw. A story passed in silence, in rain, in the trembling hands of girls who never asked to be rescued, only to be seen. Sometimes I still wake early, make tea, and sit by the window like I used to, but I'm not waiting anymore, because she came back. Not for closure, not for applause, but because she carried the thread all those years and knew where it began. And now, so do I. Most people live their whole lives not knowing if they ever mattered. I was one of them, until the knock on my door, until a grown woman, soaked in memory, handed me a quilt and said, "There's something I need to tell you." I still remember the night I gave her that blanket, the weight of it in my arms, the decision made not out of courage, but instinct. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was just a moment. But I've learned something in the years since. It only takes one moment, one thread, to begin a pattern that holds the world together. Not everyone sees it, but the ones who've been cold before, the ones who've stood in the rain and felt invisible, they do. They remember, and that's enough. I don't need statues. I don't need stories written about me, because somewhere out there, there's a girl, now a woman, handing out quilts and kindness and silence to people who need it. And maybe, one day, someone will ask her where she learned to be that way. She might not say my name, but she'll remember the porch light, the steaming tea, and the warmth of a stranger's hands in a storm. And that is everything.
Love this story? Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.